Really? I don't think you will be of much help.
Victoria Chen's voice was ice. The janitor stood in her office doorway holding a toolbox. Every system was down, servers black, phones dead. The $4.2 billion acquisition, closing in 3 hours, frozen mid-transaction. Marcus Hayes, the night janitor, had just offered to look at the network. "I used to work in IT," he said quietly. "Used to?" Victoria laughed, cruel and sharp. "Get out. I don't need a janitor pretending to be—" Then her assistant ran in. "The backup generators just failed. Everything's gone. Would you have listened to him?" But before we see what happens next, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Where are you listening from right now? All right, let me tell you how Victoria Chen ended up here. 6 months earlier, Victoria Chen wasn't begging a janitor for help. She was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Time, all in the same month. "The woman who disrupted Silicon Valley," the headline read. At 38 years old, she'd built cybercore solutions from a garage startup to a $12 billion cybersecurity empire. Headquarters in San Francisco's financial district, 4,000 employees across 20 countries, contracts with every Fortune 500 company that mattered. Monday morning, 6 a.m. Victoria's corner office on the 42nd floor overlooked the Bay Bridge, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view that cost more than most people's houses. The office itself was a statement. Glass desk with nothing on it except a laptop and a single orchid. White leather furniture, walls displaying patents and awards. Everything minimalist, everything controlled, everything perfect. The Nakamura acquisition closes in 6 months, her CFO James reported during the morning briefing. "If we pull this off, we'll control 60% of the enterprise security market. The board is nervous about the price tag. $4.2 billion is aggressive, but the numbers work." Victoria didn't look up from her laptop. "The board isn't nervous. Harrison is nervous because he wanted to retire rich, not wealthy. There's a difference. The acquisition happens. End of discussion." Around the conference table sat 8 executives, all men over 50 except for Victoria and her VP of Engineering, Lisa Park. They'd learned not to question Victoria's decisions. In 10 years, she'd never been wrong about a major move. The garage startup to billion-dollar empire wasn't luck. It was precision, ruthlessness, and an inability to accept anything less than total victory. "What about the Logan medical contract?" Lisa asked. "They're threatening to walk if we don't drop our price by 15%. "Let them walk," Victoria said, closing her laptop with a decisive click. "They'll come back in 3 months when their current provider gets breached. Again, we don't negotiate from weakness, ever." She stood, ending the meeting. Nobody argued. Victoria Chen didn't collaborate. She directed. Her management style had been profiled, criticized, and ultimately vindicated by results that made critics look foolish. Demanding wasn't the word. Perfectionist didn't cover it. She expected everyone to operate at her level, and her level was inhuman. After the executives filed out, Lisa lingered. "Victoria, can we talk about the engineering team morale? We've lost 6 senior developers in 2 months. Exit interviews say what? That I expect competence? That I don't accept excuses?" Victoria's voice could have cut diamond. "We pay 20% above market rate. If they can't handle excellence, Google will hire them for mediocrity. It's not about the money. It's always about the money, Lisa. Or it's about ego. Either way, not my problem. Hire better people." Lisa left without another word. Victoria didn't notice. She was already on a call with Tokyo, negotiating quantum encryption contracts while simultaneously reviewing quarterly reports and responding to emails from 3 different government agencies. This was Victoria's life. Controlled, efficient, isolated by choice and fortified by success. She'd built Cybercore the same way she'd built herself, through pure force of will and an absolute refusal to depend on anyone. Born in a working-class neighborhood in Oakland, to parents who worked 3 jobs between them, Victoria had learned early that nobody was coming to save her. She'd put herself through Berkeley on scholarships and side hustles, graduated top of her class in computer science, and immediately started cybercore in a garage with $10,000 in credit card debt. 10 years later, she had billions. She also had no friends, no family she spoke to, and a reputation that made people whisper Ice Queen and Tyrant and brilliant but brutal. Victoria didn't care. Caring was weakness. Connection was vulnerability. She'd learned that the hard way. Marcus Hayes, the night janitor, started his shift at Cybercore at 11 p.m. He clocked in through the service entrance on the building's ground floor, not the marble lobby with the waterfall and the company name etched in gold, but the plain metal door next to the loading dock where deliveries arrived and trash went out. There was no security desk here, no receptionist offering a smile. Just a time clock, a grimy hallway, and a locker room that smelled like industrial cleaning chemicals and old coffee. The other janitors were already there when Marcus arrived. Luis, who'd been doing this for 20 years and had stories about every executive in the building. Maria, who worked 2 janitorial jobs and sent money back to family in Guatemala. Jerome, who was 63 and should have retired but couldn't afford to on Social Security alone. They nodded to Marcus as he arrived. Not much conversation. Everyone was too tired. This was second or third shift work for all of them, the jobs people took when every other option had closed. Marcus had been doing it for 3 years now. 3 years of night shifts, invisible work, and wages that barely covered rent and Emma's expenses. He collected his supplies from the maintenance closet. Industrial vacuum, cleaning solutions, microfiber cloths, the grey uniform with Apex Janitorial Services printed across the back. The uniform was always slightly too big, designed to fit anyone because the turnover was high and the company didn't want to pay for custom sizing. Marcus was 41 years old, 6 feet tall, with dark hair going grey at the temples, and the kind of face that looked tired even when he wasn't. The routine never changed. Floors 1 to 10, lobbies, conference rooms, break rooms, floors 11 to 20, cubicle areas, smaller offices, floors 21 to 30, more of the same. Floors 31 to 40, executive territory, where the carpets got thicker and the furniture got expensive, and the trash cans were somehow cleaner because people who made more money apparently produced less actual trash. Floor 42, Victoria Chen's corner office, which Marcus cleaned last because it was always empty and he could take his time without anyone noticing. The work was methodical. Vacuum in rows, never miss a spot. Wipe surfaces with microfiber cloths, never leave streaks. Empty trash, replace liners, clean break room counters and coffee makers that would be dirty again by 9 a.m. The job required attention to detail, but not thought, which Marcus appreciated. After 16-hour days split between this and warehouse work, he didn't have energy for thinking. What he did think about during the quiet hours mopping floors and emptying trash was how he'd ended up here. MIT graduate with a 3.8 GPA, 12 years in IT security at companies that paid 6 figures, a career trajectory that should have led to a corner office like Victoria Chen's, not to cleaning it at 2 a.m. while she was at home in whatever mansion billionaires slept in. But life didn't care about trajectories. Sarah's cancer diagnosis had come when Marcus was 32, riding high as a senior security engineer at a fintech startup. The medical bills started immediately. Experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, specialists who didn't take any insurance, medications that cost more per month than their rent. Marcus had burned through their savings in 6 months, taken out loans, maxed credit cards, sold everything they owned that had value. Sarah fought for 2 years before she died, and by then Marcus was $340,000 in debt, with a 5-year-old daughter and a job that required 60-hour weeks and frequent travel. He'd tried to make it work, tried to keep the IT career going while being a single father. But Emma got sick. Recurring infections, specialist appointments, an immune system disorder that required constant monitoring. Marcus couldn't travel for work, couldn't pull all-nighters fixing security breaches, couldn't be the reliable, always available engineer his career demanded. He'd been laid off when Emma was 6. Performance issues, they called it, which really meant has a personal life and we need someone who doesn't. The job search after that was brutal. Every interview went the same way. Impressive resume. What have you been doing the last 6 months? Taking care of my sick daughter. Sympathetic nods, promises to be in touch, then silence. After 3 months of rejections and watching his debt go to collections, Marcus took the first job that would hire him, warehouse work, paying $16 an hour. Then he added the janitorial work at $18 an hour, because one minimum wage job wasn't enough to cover rent and Emma's medical expenses. The IT career was over. The MIT degree meant nothing. Marcus Hayes had become invisible, one of millions of Americans working 2 or 3 jobs just to survive, too exhausted to do anything except keep going. But he had Emma, visitation every weekend and 2 weekdays. He'd fought his ex-wife Rachel tooth and nail for that custody arrangement, refused to give up even when the lawyer bills added to his debt. Emma was worth it. Emma was worth everything. So Marcus mopped floors and told himself it was honest work. Told himself it didn't matter that he was qualified to be running IT security for a company like Cybercore instead of cleaning their bathrooms. Told himself that Emma didn't care if her dad was a janitor as long as he showed up for her. Most days he almost believed it. Tonight was different. Tonight his phone had buzzed 20 minutes into his shift with a text from his ex-wife Rachel. Emma has strep throat again. She needs to see the specialist. I don't have the $400 for the appointment. Can you cover it? Marcus stopped vacuuming in the middle of the 3rd floor lobby and stared at the screen. $400 he didn't have. His checking account had $180. Payday was in 5 days, and that paycheck was already allocated. $600 for rent, $200 for his share of Emma's medical bills from last month, $150 for the payment plan on the debt still in collections, and whatever was left for food and gas. Emma was 7 years old and had been sick with recurring infections for 6 months. Rachel had taken her to the pediatrician 4 times, and every time they'd prescribed antibiotics that worked for a week, and then the infection came back. The specialist, a pediatric immunologist who'd actually run comprehensive tests, had figured out the real problem last time. Emma's tonsils were chronically infected and needed to be removed. A simple procedure that would solve everything, except it cost $3,000 even with Rachel's insurance. And neither Rachel nor Marcus had $3,000. Marcus had been saving, working the double shifts, janitorial at Cybercore from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., warehouse work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., sleeping from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. when he could manage it. 4 hours of sleep, 16 hours of work, repeat. In 6 months of this grinding schedule, he'd managed to save $200 toward Emma's surgery. At this rate, he'd have the $3,000 in another year and a half. But Emma was suffering now, missing school because she was sick, falling behind in reading because she couldn't concentrate through the pain, crying at night from throat pain, according to Rachel's texts. The specialist appointment cost $400 just for the consultation. Without it, they couldn't schedule the surgery, even if Marcus somehow found the $3,000. It was a necessary step, an impossible step. Marcus texted back, I'll figure it out. Take her to the appointment tomorrow. I'll get you the money by morning. He didn't know how, but his daughter needed help, so he'd figure it out. That's what fathers did, right? They figured it out. He went back to vacuuming, working through the floors methodically, the familiar back and forth motion requiring no thought. His mind spun through options. Option 1. Ask his brother Daniel for a loan. But Daniel had just been laid off from his construction job and was living on unemployment. Asking him for $400 would mean Daniel couldn't pay his own bills. Option 2. Try to pick up extra shifts at the warehouse. But he was already working 50 hours a week there, and they told him explicitly they couldn't offer overtime, and even if they could, extra shifts wouldn't get him $400 by tomorrow morning. Option 3. Ask his landlord, Mrs. Chen, no relation to Victoria, for an extension on rent. Tell her he'd pay December's rent late. Use that $600 for Emma's appointment and catch up somehow. But he'd asked for an extension 3 months ago when Emma had been hospitalized overnight. Mrs. Chen had been understanding then, but she'd also made it clear she couldn't run a charity. Asking again meant risking eviction. Option 4. There was a payday loan place 6 blocks from his apartment. 400% interest rate, designed to trap people in debt spirals. Everything Marcus had read told him to avoid them, but they'd give him $400 today, and he could figure out how to pay it back later. The decision made him feel physically sick, but what choice did he have? Emma came first. She always came first. Marcus finished floor 3 and moved to floor 4, his thoughts dark. This was his life, working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, and still unable to afford a $400 doctor's appointment for his daughter, still unable to provide the most basic medical care. He'd had a MIT degree, he'd been successful once, and now he was considering a payday loan that would trap him in debt for years because he couldn't scrape together $400. The American dream, he thought bitterly, was dead. Or at least it had died for people like him, the ones who'd followed the rules, got the degree, worked hard, and then discovered that one medical crisis could destroy everything permanently. Marcus reached floor 42 at 2:30 a.m. Victoria Chen's office was dark, empty as always. He unlocked the door with his master key and stepped inside. The view at night was spectacular. San Francisco lit up like a circuit board, the Bay Bridge glowing in the distance. Marcus allowed himself 30 seconds to appreciate it, then got to work. Vacuum the carpet, wipe down the glass desk, water the orchid, empty the pristine trash can that never had anything in it except a single Starbucks cup from that morning. Clean the private bathroom that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. He noticed the laptop on the desk was still on, screen dark, but power light glowing. Probably shouldn't be left like that overnight, but not his business. Marcus wiped around it carefully. Then he saw the photograph. It was the only personal item in the entire office, a framed picture facing away from where visitors would sit, positioned so only Victoria would see it when she was at her desk. Marcus shouldn't have looked. It wasn't his business. But curiosity got him. The photo showed a younger Victoria, maybe late 20s, with a man about the same age. They were standing in front of a garage with a handmade banner that read, "Cybercore Solutions, Opening Day," both smiling, both looking at the camera with the kind of optimism people have before life gets complicated. Marcus carefully replaced the frame exactly where it had been and finished cleaning. He didn't know who the man in the photo was, but the fact that Victoria kept this single personal item, hidden from everyone, facing only her, it made him think maybe the Ice Queen wasn't entirely ice. He locked the office and moved on to the next floor. He had 8 more hours of work ahead of him, then the warehouse shift, then back here tomorrow night. This was his life. Exhausting, invisible, grinding but honest work that put food on the table and slowly built toward Emma's surgery fund. Marcus didn't complain. Complaining changed nothing. He just kept moving. The Nakamura acquisition had taken Victoria 2 years to set up. Nakamura Technologies was a Japanese cybersecurity firm with proprietary AI threat detection algorithms that were years ahead of anything else in the market. Acquiring them would make Cybercore untouchable, dominant in a way that would fundamentally reshape the entire industry. But Nakamura's CEO, Hiroshi Nakamura, was old school. He didn't like aggressive American companies. He didn't like women CEOs. He didn't like Victoria's reputation for ruthlessness. Convincing him to sell had required patience Victoria didn't naturally possess, cultural sensitivity she'd had to learn, and a price tag that made her board nervous. $4.2 billion. The deal would close in 6 months, December 15th at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Everything was in place. The contracts were drafted. The regulatory approvals were done. Both boards had voted yes. It was just a matter of executing the final transaction, until it wasn't. Wednesday morning, 5:47 a.m. Victoria's phone rang. Not her normal alarm, an emergency call from her chief technology officer. "We've been breached." David's voice was tight with panic. "Someone's inside our network. They hit us 3 hours ago. We just discovered it." Victoria was out of bed instantly. "How bad?" "Bad. They're in everything. Client data, source code, financial records, the Nakamura acquisition documents. Everything." "Who?" "We don't know yet. But Victoria, they left a message on your personal server. It says, 'You can't buy your way out of this one.'" Victoria felt ice slide down her spine. "I'm on my way. Lock down everything. Nobody talks to the press. Nobody talks to anyone." She was in her car in 4 minutes, driving toward the office while her mind raced. A breach at Cybercore, a cybersecurity company, was catastrophic. Their entire business was built on being impenetrable. If clients found out they'd been compromised, every contract would be in jeopardy. The Nakamura deal would evaporate, the stock price would crater, and the message, personal, targeted, vicious, meant this wasn't random. Someone was specifically attacking her. By the time Victoria reached the office at 6:30 a.m., the IT team was in full crisis mode. Servers were being isolated. Systems were being analyzed. David and his team looked like they hadn't slept, their faces reflecting the same terror Victoria felt but would never show. "Give me the details," Victoria said, her voice calm and cold. "Everything." David pulled up logs on the main screen. The attacker came in through a vulnerability in our VPN system. They had credentials, legitimate admin access. Once inside, they moved laterally through the network, accessing everything. Client databases, proprietary code, financial projections, board meeting minutes, personal emails, everything. How long were they inside? 3 hours before our alerts caught it. We've locked them out now, but the damage is done. They copied everything. Victoria stared at the screen, her mind processing scenarios. Who had admin credentials? That's the thing. David's voice dropped. The credentials belonged to Ryan Mitchell. The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. Ryan Mitchell, her co-founder, the man in the photograph on her desk, the partner who'd started Cybercore with her in that garage 10 years ago, the partner she'd forced out of the company 5 years ago in a brutal boardroom coup when he'd wanted to slow their expansion and she'd wanted to accelerate, the partner who'd walked away with a settlement and a non-compete agreement, bitter and betrayed. Ryan's credentials shouldn't work anymore, Victoria said slowly. We deactivated everything when he left. We did, but someone reactivated them 2 weeks ago, from inside the company. We're trying to figure out who. Victoria felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just a breach. This was targeted. This was revenge, and it was going to destroy everything. The next 6 months were a nightmare of damage control, legal battles, and watching everything Victoria had built start to crumble. The breach became public within days, leaked to TechCrunch by someone with inside knowledge. The stock price dropped 40% overnight. 3 major clients terminated their contracts immediately, citing security concerns. The Nakamura deal didn't evaporate. It froze, with Hiroshi Nakamura's lawyers demanding additional security guarantees and price renegotiations. Victoria fought back with everything she had. She hired the best crisis management firm in Silicon Valley. She testified before Congress about corporate cybersecurity. She personally called every major client and gave them her word, her personal guarantee, that Cybercore was still the safest option in the market. But the damage was done. Confidence was shattered. Competitors were circling. and Victoria couldn't find who'd reactivated Ryan's credentials or where the stolen data had gone. The board started turning on her. Harrison, her longest-serving board member, led the charge. "This happened under your watch, Victoria. Your leadership created an environment where someone wanted to hurt us badly enough to do this." "My leadership built this company," Victoria shot back. "Don't confuse a criminal attack with management failure. The two aren't separate," Harrison said coldly. "We're calling for a vote of confidence. The board needs to decide if you're still the right person to lead Cybercore." The vote was scheduled for December 15th, the same day the Nakamura acquisition was supposed to close. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. She'd have to save the acquisition and save her job at the same time, or lose everything simultaneously. Marcus noticed the change in Victoria Chen around October. She started staying late in the office, not leaving at 6 p.m. like she used to, but working until midnight, sometimes later. Several times Marcus arrived for his 11 p.m. shift and found her still at her desk, staring at multiple screens, her face drawn with exhaustion. They never spoke. Victoria never acknowledged his presence. Marcus was invisible to her, just part of the building infrastructure like the elevators or the climate control. He didn't take it personally. That was the reality of being a janitor. You saw everyone, but nobody saw you. But Marcus noticed things. His 12 years in IT security had trained him to observe patterns, anomalies, changes in baseline behavior. And Victoria Chen's behavior was changing dramatically. The trash can that used to contain one Starbucks cup now filled up with energy drink cans, Red Bull, Monster, 5-hour energy bottles, 6 or 7 a day sometimes. The kind of consumption that said someone wasn't sleeping. The pristine glass desk that had always been empty except for a laptop and an orchid was now covered with papers, contracts, financial documents, legal briefs, network security reports. Victoria had always been organized to the point of obsession. Seeing her workspace chaotic was like seeing a crack in a foundation. The orchid was dying, not watered in weeks, leaves turning brown. Victoria had always been meticulous about that orchid. It had been there for years, perfectly maintained. Letting it die meant she'd stopped caring about details, which for someone like Victoria meant she'd stopped caring about control. And the photograph, the single personal item she kept, always facing her desk, always positioned exactly 3 inches from the left edge. In October, Marcus noticed it turned face down, like Victoria couldn't stand to look at it anymore. Something was seriously wrong. Marcus didn't know what, and it wasn't his business to ask. But he recognized the body language of someone drowning. He'd been there himself, the year Sarah died, the months after he'd lost his IT career. He knew what it looked like when someone was fighting to keep their head above water and losing. He started cleaning Victoria's office more carefully, making sure the energy drink cans were emptied before they piled up, and made her space feel more chaotic, organizing the papers into neat stacks when she wasn't looking, not reading them, just straightening them so the mess wasn't overwhelming, watering the orchid because dying plants in your workspace made everything feel more hopeless. Victoria never noticed, or if she did, she never said anything. Marcus told himself it was just good customer service, doing his job thoroughly. But truthfully, he felt something like sympathy for this woman who had everything and seemed to be holding it together by sheer force of will. He knew how exhausting that was. One night in early December, Marcus was cleaning Victoria's office at 1 a.m. when she suddenly spoke. "Do you have children?" Marcus looked up, startled. She was staring out the window, not at him. For a moment, he thought maybe she was on a phone call. Then she turned, waiting for an answer. "Yes, ma'am. A daughter. She's 7. Is she worth it? Everything you sacrifice for her?" The question was so strange, so raw, that Marcus answered honestly. "She's the only thing that makes any of it worth it." Victoria nodded slowly, then turned back to the window. The conversation was over. Marcus finished cleaning and left. He didn't know why she'd asked, but something in her voice had sounded lost. December 15th arrived, the day of reckoning, The Nakamura acquisition was scheduled to close at 3 p.m. The board vote on Victoria's leadership was scheduled for 5 p.m. Everything would be decided in one afternoon. Victoria arrived at the office at 5 a.m., needing every minute to prepare. The acquisition was hanging by a thread. Nakamura's lawyers had demanded dozens of additional security clauses, and the price had been renegotiated down to $3.8 billion, a humiliating concession that the board blamed on Victoria's mishandling of the breach. But if she could close the deal, it might save her job, might prove she was still capable of leading Cybercore through crisis, might show that she wasn't finished. At 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the transaction was scheduled to execute, every system in Cybercore went dark. Servers crashed, monitors went black, phones died, the backup power systems failed to kick in, the entire building lost electricity, internet, everything. Victoria's conference room, full of executives, lawyers and board members preparing for the final transaction, plunged into chaos. "What happened?" Harrison demanded. "I don't know," David said, already pulling out his phone. "Everything just went offline simultaneously. That shouldn't be possible." Victoria felt her heart drop into her stomach. This wasn't random. This was the final attack. Someone had timed this perfectly to destroy the acquisition and her career in one move. She ran to her office, Harrison and the executives following. The building's emergency lights had kicked in, casting everything in dim red. Outside, she could see other buildings with power. This wasn't a citywide outage. This was targeted at Cybercore specifically. "Can we get the systems back online?" Victoria asked David, her voice steady despite the terror she felt. "I don't know. We need to access the server room, figure out what caused the crash and—" "How long?" "Hours. Maybe longer. The Nakamura transaction is supposed to execute at 3. If our systems aren't online, the deal dies automatically. There's a termination clause." Victoria checked her watch. 2:51 p.m., 9 minutes. "There has to be a way," she said. "Manually restart the servers, bypass whatever caused the crash, get just enough online to execute the transaction. We're trying, but Victoria, even if we get power back, we need to verify the systems are secure. If this is another attack, executing the transaction could expose Nakamura's data. They'll sue us into oblivion." Harrison stepped forward. "This is over, Victoria. The acquisition is dead. Your leadership killed it. The board vote is academic now. You're done." Victoria wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to rewind time and figure out where she'd failed, where she'd left herself vulnerable, where she'd trusted the wrong person. Then Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding a toolbox. "Ms. Chen?" His voice was quiet. "I might be able to help." Victoria turned, not recognizing him for a moment in the red emergency lighting. Then she saw the janitor uniform, registered who he was, and felt a surge of frustration. "Really? I don't think you will be of much help." Her voice was ice, the same dismissive tone she'd used 1,000 times with people she considered beneath her notice. "This is a technology crisis. Unless you have a degree in computer engineering," Marcus said calmly. "MIT. I worked in IT security for 12 years before I became a janitor. If your main server room is on sub-level 2, I know the building's backup systems. I might be able to manually restart critical servers and get your network online long enough to execute whatever transaction you're trying to save." The room went silent. Everyone stared at Marcus, the invisible janitor who apparently had an MIT degree and a decade of IT security experience. Victoria processed this in seconds. She had no other options. The clock was at 2:53 p.m., 7 minutes. "Can you do it?" "I can try, but I need access to the server room now." "David, take him down there. Do whatever he says." Harrison protested. "Victoria, you're trusting a janitor with— I'm trusting someone who might be able to save this company. Everyone else, get out of my way." Marcus and David ran. The server room on sub-level 2 was chaos. Banks of machines that should have been humming with activity were completely dark, cooling systems offline, temperature already rising. Emergency lights cast everything in red shadows. David pulled out his phone flashlight while Marcus set down his toolbox and stepped into the space. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Hayes felt like himself. The server room was a disaster, but it was a disaster he understood. Rows of rack-mounted servers, networking equipment, power distribution units, cooling systems. This was his language. This was the world he'd been exiled from, and walking back into it felt like coming home. "What caused the crash?" Marcus asked, already moving to the main power distribution panel with the kind of confidence that came from 12 years of doing exactly this kind of work. "We don't know," David said, his voice tight with panic. "Everything just shut down simultaneously. Complete power failure across all systems." Marcus opened the PDU panel and immediately began tracing the power flow. Main feed from building electrical backup battery systems, secondary generator feed, all 3 power sources offline simultaneously. That shouldn't be possible. Modern server rooms were designed with redundancy upon redundancy specifically to prevent this scenario, which meant this wasn't an accident. He traced wiring with his fingers, checking breaker switches, examining connections. David watched with his phone light, trying to help but clearly out of his depth with hardware. Most IT guys these days worked in cloud environments and virtualization. The physical infrastructure was someone else's problem. But Marcus had started his career when you had to understand hardware inside and out. When a server crashed, you didn't just restart a VM. You got your hands dirty. 90 seconds in, he found it. Someone physically sabotaged the primary and backup power systems, Marcus said, pointing to where wires had been deliberately cut. Not torn or damaged by electrical surge, cut with wire cutters in specific locations designed to create a cascading failure. They cut the main feed here, the backup battery connection here, and the generator transfer switch here. Whoever did this had physical access to this room and knew exactly what they were doing. David's face went pale. "Can you fix it?" Marcus assessed the damage. Permanent repair would require replacing the cut sections, reconnecting everything properly, testing the entire power system. Hours of work, maybe days. But temporary fixes. "Not permanently," Marcus said, already pulling tools from his toolbox. "But I can bypass the damaged sections and reroute power to the critical servers through the emergency power system. It's not designed to handle full load, so you'll get maybe 20 minutes of runtime before the whole thing overloads and shuts down again. 30 minutes if we're lucky. What's your priority?" "Transaction server," David said immediately. "We need it online to execute a $3.8 billion financial deal. If we miss the window, everything collapses." Marcus nodded and went to work. His hands moved with practiced precision, stripping wire insulation with his multi-tool, connecting bypass jumpers, rerouting power through secondary distribution panels that were never designed for this but would work in an emergency. He worked fast, muscle memory taking over, mind calculating voltage loads and current distribution and failure points. David watched in amazement. This wasn't someone fumbling through a repair. This was expert-level work being done at emergency speed by a janitor in a grey uniform. "Where did you say you worked before?" David asked. "Fin Secure Technologies, Senior Security Engineer. Before that, MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Before that, a startup called Cipher Systems that got acquired." Marcus didn't look up, just kept working. 12 years in IT security and infrastructure. Then my wife got cancer. Medical bills bankrupted us. I became a single father, and nobody wants to hire an engineer who can't work 60-hour weeks. So here we are. Jesus! Yeah. Marcus connected the final bypass, double-checked his work, and threw the emergency power switch. "Cross your fingers." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, one by one, status lights began flickering to life on the server racks. Cooling fans started spinning. Hard drives began their startup sequences. The hum of active servers filled the room. Marcus watched the power distribution panel, monitoring the load. The emergency system was pulling 87% capacity, higher than he'd like, but stable for now. "You've got your transaction server," Marcus said, checking his watch. 2:58 p.m. "You've got maybe 20 minutes of stable power, maybe 30 if nothing else trips. After that, the emergency system will overload and we'll lose everything again. If you're going to execute this deal, do it now." David was already sprinting toward the elevator, phone to his ear. Marcus stayed in the server room, alone with the machines and the sound of cooling fans and the red emergency lights. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of the power monitoring panel, watching voltage levels and current draw, ready to make adjustments if anything started to spike. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't mopping floors or emptying trash cans. He was doing the work he'd been trained for. The work he was good at. The work that mattered. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Victoria executed the Nakamura acquisition at 2:59 p.m. with 30 seconds to spare. $3.8 billion transferred. Contracts signed digitally. The deal closed. Then, at 3:19 p.m., exactly as Marcus had predicted, the server systems overloaded and crashed again, plunging the building back into darkness. But it didn't matter. The acquisition was done. The aftermath took days to sort out. David's team worked around the clock to permanently repair the sabotage and secure the systems. The FBI got involved, investigating the physical breach and who'd had access to the server room. And Marcus Hayes, the janitor with the MIT degree, who'd saved a $3.8 billion acquisition with 20 minutes and a toolbox, became the most talked-about person at Cybercore. Word spread fast. By the next morning, everyone in the building knew the story. Victoria Chen's company was about to collapse. The janitor had offered to help. Victoria had dismissed him with contempt, and then he'd saved everything anyway. The story got embellished with each retelling. Marcus became a secret genius. Victoria became a villain who got her comeuppance. The whole thing became a morality tale about respecting the invisible people who keep the world running. Marcus tried to avoid the attention. He showed up for his janitorial shift at 11 p.m. the next night, like nothing had happened, clocked in through the service entrance, collected his supplies. But this time, when he stepped onto the lobby floor, employees were still working late, and they looked at him differently. "Hey, man," said a young engineer Marcus had never spoken to. "That was incredible what you did yesterday, seriously." "Just did what needed doing," Marcus said, uncomfortable with the attention. "No, you saved this company. Half of us would be unemployed right now if that acquisition had fallen through. You're a hero." Marcus wasn't a hero. He was just a janitor who'd gotten lucky that his old skills had still been relevant. But he nodded politely and moved on to his work. Victoria called him to her office 2 days later, Friday morning, 10 a.m. She'd sent the request through the Apex Janitorial Services dispatcher, formal and official. "Please have Marcus Hayes report to floor 42, suite 4200 at 10 a.m. on December 17th. Like he was being summoned to see the principal. Marcus showed up in his civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, the closest thing to professional attire he owned. He'd been up since 6 a.m. with Emma, dropped her off at school, then come straight here. He was exhausted but tried not to show it. Victoria's assistant, a woman named Patricia, who Marcus had seen dozens of times but never spoken to, greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Hayes, Ms. Chen is expecting you. Go right in." The office looked different during the day. Sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of San Francisco spectacular. The desk was clean again, papers organized, the orchid looking healthier. The photograph was turned right side up. The power was back on. The systems were secure. The Nakamura acquisition had been announced to massive press coverage. Cybercore's stock had recovered 30% of its losses overnight. The board had held their vote and decided to keep Victoria as CEO. Barely from what Marcus had heard through the rumor mill, but enough. Victoria was standing by the window when Marcus entered. She turned to face him, and her expression was different than he'd ever seen it. less cold, more human. "Why didn't you tell anyone you had an IT background?" she asked. No greeting, no small talk, straight to the question that had apparently been bothering her. "Nobody asked," Marcus said simply, "and it didn't matter. When you're applying for janitorial work, an MIT degree is actually a liability. Makes you look overqualified, like you'll leave the first time something better comes along. I needed a job that would hire me, not one impressed by my resume. But why leave IT security at all? MIT degree, 12 years in the field. You should be working at Google or Amazon or running your own company, not mopping floors in someone else's." Marcus had known this question was coming. He'd been avoiding it for 3 years, avoiding the pity, avoiding the judgment, avoiding having to explain how far he'd fallen. But Victoria Chen had just spent 6 months fighting for her company and her reputation. She'd been humbled in a way that people like her rarely experienced. Maybe she'd understand. "My wife Sarah got cancer when I was 32, Marcus said. Stage 3 melanoma, aggressive. The treatment protocol that her insurance would cover had a 30% survival rate. The experimental treatment that might actually save her life, 60% survival rate, cost $200,000 and insurance wouldn't touch it." He kept his voice level, factual. He'd told this story enough times that the emotion had been wrung out of it. "So we paid for the experimental treatment. Savings, loans, credit cards, money from family. Sarah fought for 2 years, and the treatment worked. It bought her time. But then the cancer came back. Different this time. More treatments, more money. By the time she died, we were $340,000 in debt, and I had a 5-year-old daughter." Victoria was listening with complete attention, not interrupting. "I tried to keep my IT career going while being a single father, but then Emma got sick. Immune system disorder, recurring infections, constant specialist appointments. I couldn't travel for work anymore, couldn't pull all-nighters fixing security breaches, couldn't be the always available engineer the job required, so I got laid off." "Performance issues?" Victoria asked. "That's what they called it. Really meant has a personal life, and we need someone who doesn't." Marcus shrugged. "I spent 3 months applying for IT jobs and getting rejected from everyone. Eventually I needed money, Emma needed food, and Apex Janitorial Services would hire me same day, no questions asked. So here we are." Victoria absorbed this. She walked to her desk and sat down, gesturing for Marcus to take the chair across from her. "The board voted yesterday," she said, "on my leadership. They decided to keep me, thanks to the Nakamura deal closing. The vote was 7-5. 2 years ago, it would have been unanimous, but I know what they think now, what everyone thinks, that I'm brilliant but brutal, successful but impossible, someone who builds empires but destroys relationships." She looked at the photograph on her desk, the image of her younger self with Ryan Mitchell. "That's Ryan," she said, "my co-founder, my partner, the person who believed in cybercore when it was just an idea in a garage. I forced him out 5 years ago because he wanted to slow down and I wanted total control. I thought needing people was weakness. I thought caring about relationships was a distraction from success." She looked back at Marcus. "You saved my company. A janitor I dismissed and disrespected saved everything I'd built. And you did it while working 16-hour days to afford medical care for your daughter. You did it while fighting to stay in her life, even though it cost you your career. You did it because when someone needed help, you helped, even when they'd been cruel to you." Victoria pulled an envelope from her desk drawer. "This is a contract. I'm offering you the position of Chief Security Officer at Cybercore. Base salary, $280,000. Full health benefits with 0 deductible. Stock options that vest over 4 years. Flexible hours so you can be with your daughter. You can work from home when needed, take time off for Emma's appointments, and I'll never question whether you're dedicated enough because you actually have a life outside this office." She slid the envelope across the desk. "The position starts January 1st if you want it. If you don't, I understand. I haven't exactly earned your trust. Marcus stared at the envelope. $280,000. Health benefits with zero deductible. That alone would solve the medical bills problem that had been crushing him for years. Stock options, flexible hours. It was everything he'd lost, everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd accepted he would never have again. Why? He asked, his voice rough. Because you're competent. Because you showed up when it mattered. Because I've built a company full of brilliant people who are all terrified of me, and I need someone who isn't. Victoria's voice softened. And because I've spent 10 years believing that caring about people was weakness, you've spent the last few years proving that caring about people is the only thing that makes us strong. I want to learn how to do that, and I think you can teach me. Marcus picked up the envelope. Inside was a formal contract, exactly as described. He read through it carefully. His IT background had taught him to read contracts thoroughly. It was legitimate. No hidden clauses. No tricks. Just an offer for a job he was qualified for, at a salary that would change his and Emma's life completely. I'll need to give Apex 2 weeks' notice, Marcus said. I can't leave them without coverage. They gave me work when nobody else would. I owe them that much. Victoria smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, possibly the first time Marcus had seen her face do that. That's exactly why I made the right choice, she said. 6 months later, Cybercore was stronger than it had ever been. The Nakamura integration was ahead of schedule, the combined company now controlling 58% of the enterprise security market, just as Victoria had planned. The security vulnerabilities from the breach had been not just fixed, but completely overhauled under Marcus's leadership. Cybercore's systems were now more secure than they'd ever been, but the bigger changes were harder to quantify. Victoria had started rebuilding relationships with the executives and employees she'd alienated. It was slow work. Trust, once broken, didn't repair overnight. But she showed up differently now, asked questions instead of issuing commands, listened to concerns instead of dismissing them, admitted when she was wrong, which shocked everyone the first time it happened. Lisa Park, the VP of Engineering who'd nearly quit during the breach crisis, told Marcus at a company happy hour, I don't know what you did to her, but Victoria is actually human now. It's weird, but good weird. Marcus became not just Chief Security Officer, but Victoria's most trusted advisor, the person who told her the truth when everyone else was still afraid to. They met every Friday afternoon, not to discuss business, but for Victoria to ask questions like, how do I apologize to someone I've been terrible to for 3 years? And, is it weird if I ask the engineering team about their families? Marcus would answer honestly, sometimes bluntly. Yes, it's weird if you've never cared before and suddenly start, but people appreciate effort. Just be genuine. Victoria was learning to be genuine. It didn't come naturally, but she was trying. Emma visited the office after school sometimes, doing homework in the break room while Marcus finished his workday. The first time it happened, Victoria had walked past, saw the 7-year-old surrounded by math worksheets, and felt an unfamiliar urge to help. Need help with that? She'd asked, awkward and uncertain. Emma had looked up with huge brown eyes. Do you know multiplication? I have a degree in computer science. I know multiplication. Now it was routine. 2 or 3 times a week, Victoria would spend 30 minutes in the break room helping Emma with homework. Sometimes they'd talk about school, about Emma's friends, about the book Emma was reading. Small talk that Victoria had never been good at, had never seen the point of, but which now felt important in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The photograph on Victoria's desk wasn't turned face down anymore. She'd added a second frame beside it, a picture of Emma that Marcus had shared, showing his daughter post-surgery with her tonsils successfully removed, grinning despite the ice pack. Not Victoria's daughter, not her family, but a reminder that caring about people wasn't weakness. It was the only thing that had saved her. Marcus's life had transformed in ways that still felt surreal. The $280,000 salary meant he'd paid off Emma's medical bills, paid off the credit card debt from Sarah's cancer treatment, moved to a 2-bedroom apartment where Emma had her own room when she visited. The health insurance with zero deductible meant Emma's immune disorder was being managed properly. Regular appointments with specialists, medications that worked. No more panicked texts from Rachel about expenses they couldn't afford. Emma's surgery had been successful. The tonsils removed. The chronic infections finally stopped. She was thriving at school, reading above grade level, making friends. The worried, often sick little girl had become energetic and happy. Marcus still worked hard. The CSO position at a company the size of Cybercore was demanding, but it was the kind of work that used his skills, challenged his mind, made him feel like himself again. And when Emma had a school play or got sick or just needed her dad, he could take time off without fear of being fired. He'd gotten his life back. The life medical bankruptcy had stolen. The life he'd accepted was gone forever. Sometimes he still couldn't believe it was real. Ryan Mitchell was arrested 4 months after the acquisition. The FBI investigation proved he'd paid a Cybercore IT contractor named Kevin Park to reactivate his old credentials and execute the initial breach. The sabotage of the physical servers on December 15th had been Ryan's own work. He'd used his old employee badge, which Cybercore had never deactivated, to access the building and cut the power systems manually. It was an elaborate, expensive act of revenge. Ryan had spent over $200,000 to destroy the company he'd helped build, all to hurt Victoria. At the trial 6 months later, Victoria testified. The prosecutor had prepped her to be clinical, factual, to describe Ryan's actions and their impact. But when she took the stand, Victoria did something different. She told the truth. "Ryan Mitchell and I built Cybercore together," she said, looking directly at Ryan in the defendant's seat. "I forced him out 5 years ago because he wanted to slow down and I wanted total control. He thought we should prioritize sustainability and employee welfare. I thought we should prioritize growth and market dominance. I won the board vote, forced him to sell his shares, and pushed him out of the company we'd built together." The prosecutor looked alarmed. This wasn't helping the case. But Victoria continued. "I thought strength meant not needing anyone. I thought caring about relationships was a distraction from success. I was wrong about all of it. What Ryan did, the breach, the sabotage, is criminal and unforgivable. He hurt our clients, endangered thousands of employees' jobs, and nearly destroyed everything we'd built. But I understand why he wanted to hurt me. I hurt him first, in ways that mattered more than business. I broke trust. I valued power over partnership. I made him feel worthless." She paused, her voice steady. "Ryan deserves to face consequences for what he did. But I deserve to face consequences for what I did too. Those consequences are just harder to quantify in a courtroom." After the trial, Ryan was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Marcus found Victoria sitting alone in her office, staring out at the San Francisco skyline. "Do you regret testifying that way?" he asked. The prosecutor was furious. "Said you almost undermined their case." "No," Victoria said. "Ryan did something terrible. But pretending I didn't contribute to making him desperate enough to do it would be dishonest. Being right all the time doesn't matter if you're wrong about what matters." She turned to face Marcus. "You saved my company. But more than that, you showed me that the people I'd dismissed as beneath my notice, the janitors, the support staff, the employees I'd never bothered to learn the names of, they're the ones who actually keep everything running. They're the ones who show up every day and do their jobs with dignity, even when people like me treat them as invisible." "You're learning," Marcus said. "I'm trying," Victoria corrected. "There's a difference." A year after the crisis, Cybercore held its annual company meeting. 4,000 employees, either in person at the San Francisco headquarters or joining virtually from 20 countries. Victoria stood on the stage in front of everyone and did something she'd never done before. She told the story of December 15th, the sabotage, the systems failure, the moment when everything was falling apart and a janitor had offered to help. "I dismissed him," Victoria said, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "I said, and I quote, 'Really, I don't think you will be of much help,' because he was a janitor and I was the CEO, and I'd built my entire life around the belief that titles and status meant competence. I was wrong. Marcus Hayes saved this company, and he did it after I'd been cruel to him, after I'd dismissed him as beneath my notice, after I'd treated him like he was invisible." She gestured to Marcus, sitting in the front row looking uncomfortable with the attention. "We have a lot of people working at Cybercore: engineers, salespeople, executives, support staff, janitorial crews, cafeteria workers, security guards. Every single person here matters. Every single person here is essential to what we do. I forgot that for a long time. I won't forget it again." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, Marcus found Victoria backstage. "You didn't have to do that. Tell the whole company about me saving the day. Makes me sound like a hero." "You are a hero," Victoria said. "Not because you fixed the servers, because you kept showing up for your daughter even when it cost you everything, because you helped someone who'd been terrible to you, because you never lost sight of what mattered, even when life stripped away everything else." Marcus shook his head. "I'm just a guy who got lucky, right skills at the right time." "No," Victoria said. "You're a guy who refused to give up on what matters. There's a difference." 2 years later, Marcus was still at Cybercore. Emma was 9 now, healthy and thriving, spending half her time with Rachel and half with Marcus. Marcus had started dating again, a woman named Jennifer who worked in project management and understood what it was like to be a single parent. Victoria had reached out to Ryan while he was in prison. Not to apologize, words couldn't fix what had broken between them, but to try to understand. They'd exchanged letters, short at first, then longer, working through what had happened, why they'd both made the choices they had. Ryan would be released in 2 years. Victoria had already told Marcus she was planning to offer Ryan a consulting contract when he got out, not to run the company, but to contribute, to be part of what they'd built together, in whatever way made sense. "Think that's a good idea?" she'd asked Marcus. "I think holding grudges is expensive," Marcus had said, "and you can afford to be generous." Cybercore was worth $18 billion now. The Nakamura acquisition had paid off exactly as Victoria had projected, but more importantly, it was a company that people wanted to work for. Employee satisfaction scores had climbed from 42% to 78%. Turnover had dropped. Innovation had increased. Because it turned out that when you treated people like they mattered, they gave you their best work. Victoria had learned that from a janitor who'd saved her company while she'd been dismissing him as beneath her notice. Sometimes the people you need most are the ones you never thought to see. And sometimes being brilliant and successful means nothing if you can't see the people right in front of you who've been there all along.